The fire crew chief looked at the woman standing near the barricade and sneered. "Ma'am, this isn't a place for spectators. Go stand somewhere that isn't about to be on fire," he said, loud enough for the whole line to hear. She didn't move. 6 minutes later, the wind shifted exactly the way she'd said it would, and the crew he'd just dismissed her warning to was suddenly running for their lives away from a wall of fire she'd told him was coming. The Hollis Ridge fire had started 2 days earlier from a lightning strike in dry timber, and by the third afternoon it had grown into a 600-acre burn that the incident command team was still struggling to contain along its eastern flank. Highway 9 had been closed for 11 miles. A dozen homes along Cedar Creek Road sat empty. Their owners evacuated the night before, and a rotating crew of hotshot firefighters worked the containment line in shifts that never seemed quite long enough to catch up with the fire's appetite for the terrain ahead of it. Renata Cole had pulled over at the roadblock on her way through the valley, not because she had any reason to be there, but because something in the smoke column rising over the ridgeline had made her stop the car before she'd consciously decided to. She stood at the edge of the barricade with her hands in her jacket pockets, watching the column's shape shift against the afternoon sky with the specific, focused attention of someone reading something the rest of the gathered onlookers weren't seeing at all. Crew Chief Dale Furman noticed her a few minutes later, mostly because she'd stepped past the outer rope line that was meant to keep spectators back from the staging area, close enough to overhear radio traffic she had no business overhearing. "Ma'am, you need to stay behind the tape," Furman said, not unkindly at first. "Your wind's about to shift," Renata said, "probably within the hour. When it does, it's going to push the fire back across your containment line on the eastern flank, and any crew still working that section is going to end up between the fire and the ridge with nowhere to go but through it." Furman looked at her for a long moment, the specific look of a man deciding how much patience a stranger's confident nonsense deserved. "Ma'am," he said, "this isn't a place for spectators. Go stand somewhere that isn't about to be on fire." A couple of the crew members loading gear nearby laughed, the easy, dismissive laugh of people who'd heard plenty of amateur weather predictions from plenty of nervous onlookers over the years and had learned not to take any of them seriously. Renata didn't laugh. She also didn't retreat. "I've read fire behavior in worse terrain than this," she said. "Your afternoon thermal's about to collapse, and when it does, you're going to get a wind reversal steep enough to turn a contained flank into an active run in under 10 minutes. "That's not how our forecast reads," Furman said, gesturing toward a laptop open on a folding table nearby, displaying the incident's official weather model. "We've got predicted winds holding steady out of the southwest through evening." "Your model's using yesterday's humidity readings," Renata said. "Somebody didn't update the input data after this morning's front moved through. Check your dew point against what your handheld's reading right now. They won't match. If something about this woman's certainty is already sitting wrong with you in the best way, hit that like button right now, because what happens on that ridge over the next hour is the reason nobody at Hollis Ridge has trusted a fire model without double-checking it since." Furman's jaw tightened, but something in her specificity, the dew point detail, the precise timing, the technical language that didn't match the vague confidence of a typical concerned bystander, made him glance, almost against his own will, toward the handheld weather unit clipped to his belt. He didn't check it. Not yet. Pride, or simple operational momentum, kept him moving toward the radio instead. "I don't have time for this," he said. "You need to get behind the tape." Renata didn't move. A younger firefighter named Wexler, 24, still new enough to the crew that he hadn't fully absorbed his chief's specific brand of dismissiveness, glanced between Renata and the handheld unit at Furman's belt with a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Chief," Wexler said, her dew point number dash. "I said I don't have time for this," Furman said, already keying his radio to check in with the crew working the eastern flank containment line, a mile and a half up the ridge in terrain that would become considerably less forgiving in the very near future. Renata watched the radio traffic proceed without her, the specific patient stillness of someone who had said what needed saying and understood, from long experience, that some warnings only get believed after the thing they warned about has already started happening. Subscribe to Legendary Veterans, because what happens to that eastern flank crew over the next 6 minutes is something every one of them will still be talking about years from now. The wind shifted at 3:47 in the afternoon. Precisely the kind of shift Renata had described. A sudden, steep reversal as the day's built-up thermal column collapsed under its own weight, dragging surface winds around from the southwest to the northeast in the span of about 90 seconds. Exactly the kind of transition that turned a manageable containment operation into an active emergency. On the eastern flank, a 6-person hand crew working a fire line through dense timber felt the wind change before they fully understood what it meant. The specific disorientation of firefighters who had trained for exactly this scenario in classrooms and were now experiencing its full, terrifying speed in person for the first time. The fire, which had been creeping steadily westward along a predictable, containable front, exploded backward across the same ground the crew had just cleared, racing uphill through timber that hadn't burned in decades, moving at a speed that outstripped the crew's ability to simply walk away from it. Furman's radio erupted with traffic, the specific, controlled panic of experienced firefighters realizing, in real time, that their situation had changed faster than their plan had accounted for. Eastern flank. This is command. Report your position, Furman said into his radio, his earlier dismissiveness entirely gone, replaced by the flat, urgent focus of a man managing a crisis he hadn't seen coming. We're pinned. The crew leader's voice came back, static crackling through genuine fear. Fire's behind us and coming fast. We can't outrun it through this terrain. Furman looked up, and his eyes found Renata, still standing exactly where she'd been standing 6 minutes earlier, watching the smoke column with the same focused attention she'd carried since she first stopped her car at the roadblock. You said this would happen, Furman said. It wasn't quite a question. I said it would happen within the hour, Renata said. You have about 4 minutes before that crew's escape route through the drainage closes entirely. Tell them to go north, not west. There's an old burn scar from a fire 11 years ago that never fully regrew. It won't carry fuel the way the rest of that slope will. It's their only clean path to the ridge. Our maps don't show an old burn scar in that section, Furman said. Your maps are current generation satellite overlays, Renata said. They don't always catch old burn scars under regrowth that looks superficially similar from above. This one's there. I'd stake everyone's life on it, which is exactly what you're about to do whether you trust me or not. Furman had approximately 4 seconds to decide whether an unauthorized civilian's confident geography lesson was worth staking 6 firefighters' lives on, weighed against every instinct built from 2 decades of following his own maps and his own training. He keyed the radio. Eastern flank, change of plan. Go north, not west. Look for an old burn scar. Might be under new growth. Should give you cleaner ground than anything to your west. Command's word, go now. If you've ever trusted your gut against every piece of official advice telling you otherwise, hit that like button, because what that crew finds when they reach the old burn scar is the reason Dale Furman never dismissed an unfamiliar face at his fire line again. The crew found the burn scar 90 seconds later, exactly where Renata had described it, a wide swath of sparse, low-growing vegetation that had never fully recovered the dense timber cover surrounding it. Precisely the kind of terrain gap that starved an advancing fire of the continuous fuel it needed to maintain its speed. The crew crossed it at a dead run, the fire's roar audible behind them the entire way, and reached the ridge above with margin to spare that felt, in the moment, like no margin at all. Furman stood at the command post with his radio in a shaking hand, listening to his crew leader's voice confirm, breathlessly, that all 6 firefighters had made it to the ridge, uninjured, considerably more frightened than they'd been in years, but entirely, unmistakably alive. He turned to look at Renata. How did you know about that burn scar, he said. His voice had lost every trace of the dismissiveness it had carried an hour earlier. Renata considered the question for a long moment. I worked that section of ridge a long time ago, she said. Different fire, different decade. I remember what burned and what didn't, even after 11 years of regrowth trying to hide the difference. You worked this ridge, Furman repeated. As what? That's not really the important detail right now, Renata said. Your crew's alive. That's the part that matters. Wexler, the young firefighter who'd noticed her dew point reading earlier, approached slowly, his expression somewhere between awe and genuine unease. Ma'am, he said, how did you know the wind would shift at exactly that time? Down to the minute. I've read a lot of thermal columns in my life, Renata said. Enough that the pattern stops feeling like guesswork and starts feeling like something closer to arithmetic. It's not magic. It's just time spent paying attention to something most people never get the chance to study closely enough. The crew leader who'd radioed in from the eastern flank, a woman named Priya Anand with 15 years on wildland crews across 4 states, arrived at the command post 20 minutes later, still breathing hard from the climb up to the ridge, soot streaked across her face and forearms. She found Renata standing near the folding table where Furman's laptop still displayed the incident's original, outdated weather model. "You're the one who called the burn scar," Priya said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Renata said. Priya studied her for a long moment, the specific evaluating look of someone who had just survived something and needed, urgently, to understand how close it had actually come to going differently. "I've worked wildfire for 15 years, she said. "I've never had a wind shift catch me that fast. My team trains for exactly that scenario, and we still nearly didn't make it." "You made it," Renata said. "That's what matters." The margin felt thin because it was thin. It doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong before I showed up. Fire behavior at that speed doesn't leave much room for anyone to react perfectly. "How close were we?" Priya asked. "Actually, not the version that goes in the report." Renata considered the question, weighing the value of complete honesty against the specific kindness of letting a woman who'd just survived something terrifying believe the margin had been slightly wider than it actually was. 90 seconds, maybe less, she said finally. "If Furman had argued with me another 2 minutes, your team would have been in that drainage when the fire crossed it instead of ahead of it." Priya absorbed that in silence, the color draining slightly further from an already soot-streaked face. 90 seconds, she repeated. "You made your 90 seconds count," Renata said. "That's the only part of this equation that was ever within anyone's control once the wind actually shifted." Furman ran a hand through his hair, the specific gesture of a man revising an entire framework of assumptions in real time. "Where did you get that kind of experience?" he asked. "Civilian wildland crews don't train for wind shift timing at that level of precision. That's not standard fire science curriculum." Renata was quiet for a moment, weighing how much of an answer the moment actually required. "I spent 11 years jumping into fires considerably more remote and considerably less forgiving than this one," she said. "Places where there wasn't a command post, wasn't a road access point, wasn't backup within a day's hike. You learn to read wind and terrain like your life depends on it, because it usually did." "Smoke jumper," Furman said. "A specific kind," Renata said. "The military kind. The kind that doesn't show up in most civilian wildland service records, because the fires we jumped into weren't always the kind anyone wanted officially documented." Furman absorbed that slowly, the pieces of the last hour rearranging themselves into a shape that made considerably more sense than it had 10 minutes earlier. "You could have just told me that from the start," he said. "Would you have believed me faster?" Renata asked. "Or would you have spent longer arguing about whether I was actually who I said I was, while your crew ran out of time to get to that burn scar?" Furman didn't have an answer for that, and they both understood, without needing to say it, that she was almost certainly right. Subscribe to Legendary Veterans, because the story of what happened on that ridge spread through wildfire crews faster than the fire itself did, and by the following week, incident commanders 3 states away were asking their own crews if they'd heard about the woman at Hollis Ridge. The official incident report, filed by Furman's command staff 2 days later, credited an experienced civilian consultant with wildland fire background for the successful evacuation of the eastern flank crew, a description carefully vague enough to satisfy the paperwork without requiring anyone to explain, in writing, exactly what civilian meant in Renata Cole's case, or which branch of service her 11 years of jumping into fires had actually belonged to. Wexler found her before she left the staging area that evening, packing her gear into the trunk of an unremarkable sedan parked well outside the barricade line where she'd first stopped. "I want to do what you do," he said. "Not the military part, necessarily. Just read fire the way you read it. Know it before it happens instead of reacting to it after." Renata looked at him for a long moment, the specific measuring look of someone deciding how much of a genuine answer a young firefighter's earnest request actually deserved. "It takes longer than you'll want it to," she said. "Years of watching fires that don't behave the way the textbooks say they should. until the exceptions start teaching you more than the rules ever did. Could you teach some of it? Even just the parts that would translate. Some of it, Renata said. Not all of it translates. Some of what I learned in places I hope you never have to go. But the parts that would help you get your crew home safe on a day like today, yes, I could teach some of that. Furman approached as Wexler stepped back, his earlier composure visibly shaken by everything the last hour had reorganized in his understanding of the fire line, of experience, of the specific danger in deciding what a stranger was and wasn't capable of before you had any real information to base that judgment on. I owe you an apology, he said, and 6 lives that wouldn't exist if I'd kept arguing with you another 2 minutes. You made the call in time, Renata said. That's the part that actually matters. The apology's generous, but it's not necessary. I'd like it to be necessary, Furman said. I told you to go stand somewhere that wasn't about to be on fire. I've been doing this job 19 years, and I've never been more wrong about anyone standing at my barricade. Renata considered him for a moment, something in her expression shifting into something that wasn't quite warmth, but was adjacent to it. You listen when it mattered, she said. Most people don't manage even that much. Once they've already decided what a stranger in a parking lot could possibly know that they don't. She left Hollis Ridge that evening without a formal statement, without a name recorded anywhere beyond the vague, civilian consultant language in Furman's incident report, driving out through the reopened section of Highway 9 as smoke continued to rise, slower now, more controlled, from a fire that had come within 6 minutes of costing 6 firefighters their lives before an unlikely stranger's stubborn insistence had bought them exactly enough warning to survive it. 3 weeks later, a plain envelope arrived at the County Fire Command office addressed to Dale Furman, no return address, containing a single handwritten page describing, in careful technical detail, wind shift indicators specific to canyon and ridge terrain, thermal collapse timing calculations, and a list of 6 other old burn scars in the surrounding county that current satellite mapping consistently failed to properly identify. It was signed only with the initials RC. Furman had the document laminated and posted it in the crew briefing room, where it remained for years afterward, referenced by name among crews who'd never met Renata Cole and had no way to fully verify who she'd actually been. Only the story of what she'd done on the one afternoon anyone at Hollis Ridge had ever needed her. Wexler stayed on with the Wildland crew for another 6 years, eventually becoming one of the county's most respected fire behavior analysts, a career path he consistently attributed, whenever anyone asked, to a single conversation with a stranger who'd stopped her car at a roadblock for reasons she'd never fully explained, and who'd seen something in a smoke column that an entire trained crew, focused entirely on the ground in front of them, had missed completely. Furman changed the way he ran his command post after that day, instituting a standing policy that any civilian offering specific, technical fire behavior information would be heard out fully before being dismissed, regardless of how unlikely their expertise appeared on the surface. It cost him nothing in the years since, and on 3 separate occasions, it had caught genuine hazards his own crew's models had missed, hazards that turned out to be exactly the kind of thing an experienced eye, wherever it came from, could catch faster than a satellite ever would. Renata Cole never returned to Hollis Ridge, and the fire that had briefly made her the subject of quiet legend among wildland crews 3 states away burned itself out completely 11 days after the wind shift that nearly cost 6 lives, contained finally along lines that held because a crew chief had learned, in the span of one terrifying afternoon, to stop assuming he already understood what a stranger standing at his barricade could or couldn't know. Some people carry an entire career of quiet, dangerous expertise into rooms and roadblocks where nobody has any reason to expect it, and some afternoons, that expertise is the only thing standing between 6 people going home to their families and 6 people who don't. Renata never asked to be believed immediately. She'd learned a long time ago that being right eventually was usually enough, provided the people around her survived long enough to find out. If this story kept you here until the very last word, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the quietest person at the edge of the crowd is sometimes the only one who can actually see what's coming. That's the whole reason stories like this one get told at all.